Hi there, everybody, and welcome to AOP Mastermind Live 2022. I want to thank you so much for joining us on our event, which is going to cover some time today, a few hours today, and a couple of hours tomorrow as well. I'm Philip Ideson. I'm the Managing Director of Art of Procurement, and I'm joined on screen by Kelly Barner. Kelly Barner is my partner here at Art of Procurement.
Thanks, Phil, and good morning, everybody. Hopefully you all have the same chills that I do after watching that opening video. Mastermind Live is one of 4 digital events that we host here annually, and each one has its own theme. And the important thing about Mastermind Live, hopefully that video sets the stage for it, is that we're trying to inspire you to think about the future, but not just flying cars and robots. We're also trying to be pragmatic. So our goal between today and tomorrow is to give you the right combination of inspiration and then how-tos, things that you can immediately put into practice at your work.
And, you know, regular listeners to the podcast may have seen a podcast last month where we launched this idea of really how can we help 10x the impact of procurement? How can we do that collectively as a community? You know, I was inspired by the idea of 10x and the power of exponential thinking by Google X, which is now named X, the Moonshot Factory. You know, how can we as procurement professionals break free of the traditional thinking that we have, break out of the boxes that I think sometimes we place around ourselves in what we think our role should be? How do we chart a new course? So over the next 2 days, we're going to be exploring this topic. How do we build excitement for a new vision while remaining focused on the here and the now? What are some of the ways we can achieve what we previously thought were impossible? And how are some of the procurement leaders who are, kind of putting this into practice today using technology to help them on the path to 10x their impact?
Now, speaking of 10x, none of this would be possible if it weren't for our sponsors. And so we want to pause and thank all of them for what they've done to make it possible for us to open this event to the entire Art of Procurement community and even the wider procurement community beyond the folks that already know us. Without them, we would have to charge you admission. So thank you so much to all of them for what they've done. Specifically, I would like to call out AOP Mastermind Live 22 Platinum sponsor Globality, as well as our gold sponsors, Oro and Spend HQ. Now, between today and tomorrow, make sure to set aside a few minutes to check out our exhibition center. It's part of the platform that you're watching us in today. Each of these partners has some interesting resources available in their exhibition booths so that you can learn more and check out their value proposition.
All right, Kelly, with that being said, I think that it's time to get started. So session 1 is going to be about achieving an exponential vision against the odds. Kelly is going to be joined by a multiple-time president and CEO, one of my favorite ever podcast guests on the Art of Procurement, Tony Uphoff. So with that being said, let's go into that first session.
Good morning, Tony. Thank you for being the first guest up on stage with us to open this year's Mastermind Live.
Hey, Kelly, it's great to be here. My thanks to you and Phil. And I'd like to add my thanks and welcome to all the attendees, but also the sponsors as well.
Absolutely. And it was funny because Phil mentioned in the transition that you've been an Art of Procurement guest. So for anybody that's taking notes, things that they want to do after today, it's episode 361 that you're going to want to go back and listen to after you've heard Tony speak today. But Tony, in addition to what you're currently doing, which Phil shared just as we transition into this session, can you tell us all a little bit more about your professional journey to this point, just to give us a little bit of background context?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I grew up in what people would probably refer to as the business information and media industry, and that's producing everything. Back then, it was magazines and then websites and trade shows and events not unlike this one for various professional communities, primarily in technology. And so what it gave me, Kelly, was really a remarkable opportunity to grow up at the intersection of business and technology. So I borne witness, if you will, to most every major technology transition over the last 25 years. And my most recent experience allowed me to transform a company, as you know, called thomasnet.com. And we'll get into that in a minute, but that brings you up to current day, if you will.
Absolutely. And one more thing before I have you share the story. You know, if people have been to our AOP live events, if you've joined us for anything before, this audience knows you are not just sitting by passively. We are looking for input and engagement from you as we go through the today. Please type in your questions, type in your comments. I'll be breaking a couple of times during my session with Tony to pull in your voice so that we get an opportunity to hear what everybody's thinking about. And you're really with us here today, Tony, to talk about an incredible transformational story, what you were able to lead at Thomas. So let me hand over to you to tell that story. It's an incredible one because Thomas is a very old organization. You and I kind of exchanged thoughts in the lead up to this event. My training is as a librarian. So I know Thomas as the green books, hard copy, bound, you know, with the green on the outside that would be in the reference section of a library, or certainly in corporate libraries as well. But you went from those hard copy green books to a fully transformed digital media organization. So take us on that journey with you and how you led the organization through that change.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And it is interesting. Younger generations today don't remember the big green books. They think of thomasnet.com as a modern data platform company. They think, in some cases, I've had people say to me, oh gosh, you're like a startup. And well, 125-year-old startup, yeah. But it's a really remarkable story. So when I joined the company was 120 years old, and it had been founded to serve engineers, procurement professionals, and MROs to enable them to source products and to evaluate and select suppliers, particularly custom manufacturers. So heavily used by procurement, by engineers, and people on a factory or shop floor. And during the 90s, Thomas was early into digital technology. So they were commercially one of the first companies on the internet. And they ran a hybrid model for a while where they still produced the binders, the green books, if you will, and then started down the path of digital. And fairly boldly, you know, private family-owned company, they decided to burn the boats on the shore and stop producing the green books in the mid-aughts at a time when they were still making a tremendous amount of money. And the philosophy was, we won't own the future the way we've owned the past unless we do that. And I start there, Kelly, because I can't take any credit for that. And I do know from running similar organizations at a period of time where print's starting to give way to digital, just how complicated that decision really was, and frankly, bold. And I'm not even sure that if this wasn't a family company with no debt, that they could control their destiny, perhaps they wouldn't have made or couldn't have made that decision. So I was recruited in 2016 timeframe to join the company because the company, while it had made the transition to digital, it had been on about a decade-long decline. And there were some reasons for that decline, as oftentimes happens. There was some technical debt that had been incurred. Some of the operating models and business models were not keeping pace with where the industry was going. As you well know, there had been also a demographic shift.
Yeah.
You know, if you look back at that era, that's when the millennial generation was coming into the workforce and was about the same size in the workforce as the baby boomer generation. So you had younger people, to your point, Kelly, that didn't know the big green books, didn't know the name Thomas. And frankly, having had big green books was not a positive for that generation in terms of engaging them. And so I was brought in. The company had flirted with potential bankruptcy or a sale before I was brought in. And I was brought in with the objective of turning the company around. And I want to emphasize that for your attendees here. I think people talk a lot about digital transformation. And the fact of the matter is, digital transformation can take a couple of different paths, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We did a very aggressive digital transformation, even though the company had, quote unquote, shifted to digital. But the goal wasn't really a digital transformation. The goal was a business model transformation, because if we didn't get to that business model transformation, the fact that we were a digital company was irrelevant. Yeah. And so I think that is really something I would emphasize. The other thing I would emphasize is it was very clear the company needed to be turned around. And by that, I mean, the trajectory was like that. We needed to turn the trajectory like that. And I don't mean to be flip about that, but I do find at times, I think management does themselves a disservice when they don't acknowledge a trajectory needs to change. So a transformation journey is starting because either growth has stalled or we're in decline, and therefore we need to transform. And I say that, Kelly, only because the toughest thing in leading a transformation, as you and all of your attendees know so well, is really a cultural one. You think you're embarking on a technology journey or a structural journey or a business model journey, and those things are all true. But the reality of it is, what you're really trying to do is to shift and change a culture to be able to serve customers better than they have in the past.
Yeah. Let's focus on this moment of needing change. There's a couple of things that I'm interested to hear from you that I think we're seeing sort of mirror versions of in today's professional world. We're talking about the Great Resignation all the time, but everyone that's leaving as part of the Great Resignation is pursuing greener grass on the other side. Whereas you were brought in to be a turnaround professional, and that's a very different internal decision on your part. What was your mindset around what you thought you had ahead of you, why you decided to take on the challenge? And if there were any reservations that you held in your mind, you know, going into the situation with eyes wide open, I'd be interested to hear about those as well.
Yeah. Kelly, when we were prepping for this, I may have mentioned that the secret to a turnaround is picking the right one. So let me start there. I'm not trying to be funny about it. What I saw at Thomas was clearly an extraordinary need on the side of users, right? Engineers, procurement professionals, and MROs, and actually in North America, a growing and robust reshoring and a very vibrant manufacturing economy. A lot of people don't realize that, but that's the fact. So I looked at that and thought, well, wait a second, that's a very robust market. Over, 1 million custom manufacturers that could make up a customer base on the advertising side. So if you think of the two-sided marketplace of, you know, the procurement professional and engineers on one side, and then the product OEMs and also the custom manufacturers on the other, very vibrant market. So step one is there a clear demand for the product and service that the company offers? And I could very comfortably say yes. Then though, and this is where some of the trepidation, comes. Yeah. So why hasn't the company achieved growth then? So if those things are true, what's holding the company back? And are there any, I hate to call them fatal decisions, but in many cases, that's what you find in companies, is that they've made some decisions that are almost irreparable. And yeah. I did, to the extent I could, Kelly, an exploration of that. I didn't find what I consider to be any brand damage. I found a very low current brand awareness. Go back to our earlier conversation about the transition from the books to online. Yes. And I thought, okay, that can be fixed, right? That can be built. And then the lap around, what I found was some very difficult and challenging decisions that had been made primarily around technology, where a lot of it had been outsourced with the understanding that that was cheaper and it was double indemnity. It was actually more expensive. And now you didn't have control over your own IP as quote unquote a digital company. So there were some sleepless nights as I kind of pulled the top off of some of that. On the positive side of the ledger, and this is always tough, they talk about, turnaround specialists talk about a third. I don't know if you've heard of this, but you meet with the company and there's going to be a third of the people that are leaning forward thinking, boy, I've been waiting for someone like Kelly to come in the door. This is fantastic. Yeah. You got a third of the people that are, not quite sure and they're a little bit reticent, and then a third of the people that are just checked out. So quickly what you've got to do, and I don't mean to be literal about the third, pretty quickly what you've got to do is to determine where's the 2/3 of the employee base where I should focus my energy and attention. Because a mistake turnaround people can make is to focus, because our instincts are, I'm going to convince Tony, I'm going to convince all these people that this is right. And then there's a whole series, I'll stop there, but there's a whole series of tactics. But to your point, what gave me pause, I think, was the level of I'll call it technical debt. And could I unwind some of those decisions? And there were some really complicated things that were connected to that, that we had to unwind. Thankfully, we were able to do that.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned earlier that Thomas had invested in digital, but that's not quite the same thing as having fully embraced the opportunity that is digital transformation. And I think that's another thing that speaks very much to the moment that a lot of procurement organizations find themselves in, because when suddenly in 2020, we all had to go home and function remotely and virtually, we thought, oh, we'll be fine. We digitally transformed. And then you come to find out there's a little bit of sausage making going on behind the scenes. You know, Mary was moving a paper, Sam was typing something into a system. And so it's not all quite as seamlessly integrated as we thought it had been. So if we can start applying some of what you learned to those types of challenges that procurement leaders are going through today, how do you root out those instances where you think something, you know, you talked about unwinding. You think everything is very tightly, neatly knotted up, when in reality, it's not quite. How do we pinpoint those places of risk?
Yeah, you know, I'll share with you, Kelly, the diagnostic, if you will, of the process I used at Thomas, but I've also had the good fortune of doing, you know, 4 major turnarounds and have the scars and pioneering experience to learn from it. But one of the things that I think is a mistake that we can all make is we start from the inside of our business out. So we think perhaps a process isn't working, right? And so we go on an internal mission to kind of determine, hey, perhaps the way we approve, you know, vendors isn't working. So we hunker down inside and we look at the process. The thing I always do is reverse that and start with the customer in, because the answer is inevitably there, right? If a company needs to be turned around, yes, there's some internal processes that likely need to be fixed. But if you don't fix them with an eye towards better serving customers and that customer experience coming in, you're not going to be successful. And I say that to procurement people specifically. When procurement folks talk to me about career development or getting a seat at the table and those types of things, I will steer the conversation into customers of the company, not employees of the company, customers of the company. How knowledgeable are you about that? So step 1, understand that customer experience coming into the company and what's going on there. Step 2, that will lead you to kind of two analyses, right? One is throughput. Do things just move through the system without a lot of friction appropriately? And pretty quickly you can understand where there's bottlenecks or whatever. And then the second thing that leads you to, Kelly, as you know, is silos. And in a digital business, we think, well, gosh, there can't be silos because there's no physical structure. Silos are worse in a digital business than they are in a manual business, because in a manual business, you can see where something drops. You can see where there's a problem. In a digital business, if procurement is keeping a database of vendors or looking at the world in a particular, you know, myopic view, you know, in a silo, and engineering or other parts of the company are looking at something completely different, and we don't break those silos down. And I don't mean just free for all, but we don't have a system for engaging those. And you use the term integrating those. That's where I think the best intentions, right, will be ineffective. So two major points I'm making, right? One is start with the customer experience into your company. As hard as it is, don't start with your internal processes out. And then where you've identified either bottlenecks and or silos, those are opportunities. And by the way, as a procurement professional, you're not going to knock down every silo in your company. But if you can become aware of where they are and collaborate with other key functions of the company to say, hey, we can be more, is it efficient, faster, better serve customers, whatever it might be. Agility today, the ability to move very rapidly given the pace of change, is a prerequisite in business. So that's an outcome there as well.
Yeah. Now, one of the things, and I actually have a question here that I'm going to bring in, serves as a great reminder for me to prompt everybody. If you have any questions or thoughts, we'll take comments as well that you want me to pose to Tony during the session. Go ahead and type those into the box right down under the screen. But, you came in as an outsider to repair, but for procurement teams that are trying to transform or improve or streamline or digitize from inside, part of where we have to start, even before we can get to the customer experience, is self-awareness. And that's very hard because now we're getting into sort of therapy territory, which none of us are really trained for. And so how do we become honest with ourselves? How do we get the people who are very happily living in those nice little silos they've built to be constructively honest with us? What would be your advice around everyone truly understanding the challenges and the opportunities that are at hand?
What a fantastic question, first off. And I mentioned before, we think we're chasing after a technology issue or a structural issue, and oftentimes we're chasing after a cultural issue. And I don't mean to demean it, but I do put this under that rubric. And I think it's really important. I think a couple of thoughts I would have there. I think if I'm in procurement, I would challenge myself. I'd be inspired to simply see that as a critical function of my business. And I would conduct myself as a business person that's helping to run and grow the business, as opposed to I'm off in this little discrete function that's at the end of a conveyor belt of decisions. And then I've got to reach out to vendors and see if I can negotiate a better deal. I would engage with other parts of the company. One of the things that I've done at companies, it's easier to do this in a medium-sized company, is in an effort to help functions like procurement or perhaps IT or others, is I did a rotational system where I would do sales for non-sales professionals, marketing for non-marketing professionals. And it wasn't extended. It would be, a 2-day, thing. But what it did is twofold. One is it would give procurement people a heightened sense of awareness of what a sales rep deals with, or perhaps what we're trying to get accomplished in the marketing spend we have, or what exactly is going on with engineering or manufacturing. But the other thing it would do is, over time, it would create relationships. Because after you would do these a few times, and I try to do these things quarterly, is the relationships would take on a life of their own. Kelly and Tony would get together over coffee and talk about, an opportunity. And I think, that's the cultural side of it. Can you do that? I guess the third thing I'd look at here, I'm a fan of inspiration. And I think oftentimes we are inspired by hearing stories. And hopefully some of the stories of turnarounds are inspiring to some of the attendees. And you see yourself in some of that. If you really frame what procurement does in a different way, strip out the term procurement, you have your first, well, let me not call it first. You have the ultimate rock star right now, who's running the most valuable company on the face of the earth. So many people have no idea where Tim Cook came from or what he did before Apple. He was at IBM in procurement and logistics, and then he was at Compaq Computer. And Steve Jobs plucked him. Now, no one in the Silicon Valley really knew who Tim Cook was at the time. If you were a manufacturing geek, you knew who Tim Cook was, because he was a genius, right? So, and by the way, Jobs had a tough time at the time because Compaq was a going concern. And he had come back to Apple, and Apple was really struggling and in financial straits. So I mention that because Tim Cook would never have ascended to be the CEO, and you don't have to aspire to be the CEO. But I think if he kept this baggage of boxing himself in and I don't use the term procurement, I just mean the impact, focus on the impact of what procurement does. You're running a business, and the function that you provide is as critical as finance. It's as critical as sales. It's as critical as engineering or manufacturing or the other. So I guess my long-winded point there, Kelly, is, we as procurement professionals can liberate ourselves from coming in with a sense of defensiveness or coming in with a sense that, hey, we need a seat at the table. Just take the seat at the table. Just start working in environments And I can't emphasize enough, take the time to understand the customer experience and the different functions of your company. Because trust me when I tell you, if you do that well, you're going to start to get invited to that seat at the table, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah. Well, and I actually think that provides a great transition to what is our core theme, not only for these 2 days, but really for the rest of the year here at Art of Procurement, which is this mission to 10x the impact of procurement. So we're not talking about safe little incremental changes and improvements. We're talking about exactly the visual you gave us earlier, whether you're starting here or whether you're starting in a stable place, making sure that we put ourselves on that trajectory to have an enormously different impact on the organization. If we start with the idea of these relationships and breaking down silos from an informational and process and technology standpoint, how does that change the type of impact that procurement is able to have? If we just take that seat, like you're suggesting, move someone aside, pull up a new chair, what does that 10x impact look like?
Well, and first off, I love the 10x impact theme. And it's a way I look at, if I'm not getting 10x per hour, I'm doing something wrong. And I really think that's a great way to look at, the impact you either are having or could have. So I think that's, really tremendous. I think for procurement, the path forward of having 10x, and I know I'm just pounding on the gong of customer. I find oftentimes when I engage with procurement, if I ask them who the customer is, they sometimes struggle with that question.
Interesting.
And they'll sometimes refer to someone in finance, or they'll refer to engineering, or they'll refer to employees of the company. And it's not a trick question. I think part of that 10x is the mindset is the company is going to grow by dazzling and delighting customers. Yeah. What can we do to do a better job of that? And you might think, well, as a procurement professional, do I have an impact on that? You bet you do. You have a tremendous impact on that. So I start, with that as a perspective. The second thing is, if you look at where the leverage in business is today, it comes in 2 areas. It comes in capital and it comes in technology. Well, let's assume somebody else in the company is likely involved in the capitalization of the company, right? That may not be a purview of procurement. Yeah. But if you look at what's happening in technology, we are at a remarkable, Kelly, inflection point, primarily based on radical advances of cloud-based infrastructure, tools, and applications that are exponentially accelerating the pace of change. So if you look at how quickly companies can turn around, how quickly companies can get into trouble, how quickly the economy is moving, how quickly geopolitics is moving today. You go back to the pandemic, how quickly a vaccine was actually developed. It never happened before.
That's right.
That's the impact of these remarkable technologies. And I'm not suggesting to procurement you need to therefore go start speccing technology, but understanding technology and understanding where these remarkable tools might be deployed in your organization. If you look at 10x another way, 10x is a reflection of scale.
Yes.
How can I put 1 hour of time in and get a 10x return? Well, today, technology is enabling. Look what we're doing right now. We're using remarkable technology to scale both physical location, the number of people we can meet with. So I would encourage those 2 things. I think one is, really do a deep dive on how your company makes money and what customers are looking for from your company. It will make you a better procurement professional, but it'll get you involved more horizontally in your company. And then I think this idea of, again, you don't need to go out and study technology and become an IT specialist, but understanding the transformative technologies that are available today, I think will open up, that 10x mindset, I guess, Kelly, right? Because you can then see, well, oh, this is actually possible. We can do this. Because if I come to the average person and say, hey, why don't we 10x this business? They might be polite, but they're going to roll their eyes. But if you show them where the tools and perhaps a couple of examples of companies and individuals that have done it, then they can do it.
And yet remaining grounded. I love your point about remembering how the company makes its money. It's easy for a lot of procurement teams, especially if they're largely confined to indirect spend responsibility, to sort of forget where is it that the cash comes from that pays for all these things. And this is an excellent question that has come in from the audience. So when we think about that, where does the money come from? But we also think about the desire to transform and to achieve 10x. During your transformational efforts, how did you combine that, keeping the lights on day to day, making sure that existing customers were not negatively impacted by any of the changes you were trying to lead, while also setting yourself on that trajectory to achieve exponential growth?
Yeah, another great question, Kelly. And you know, you're forcing me to go back and relive some things that, you know, I didn't get a lot of sleep in the first couple of years. I'll say that, because it was a tremendous amount of work, but very rewarding. So let me give you a couple of tactical, you know, ways of dealing with that. The balancing of a new vision. Let me just start with the new vision first of all. I think if a turnaround is required and you got to take things in a different direction, you need to be relentless of communicating, but also taking input on that vision. You can't just go out and give stump speeches and assume everybody gets it. You've got to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, but you also have to be listening as you're doing it, because what you're going to find over time is people initially are going to say, we tried that, it's not going to work. That won't work here. We don't have the resources, or Kelly, we don't have that. We don't have that kind of money. We can't possibly do that. But if you stick with it, and it literally is the boulder up the hill, right? If you stick with it and don't just badger people down, really listen to them, take their input. It's also going to help you determine who's going to get on this ride with you and who isn't. True. Over time. But over time, what'll happen is things will become apparent, and you can get more people moving in the right direction. The other thing is, look on the missing, not missing a beat on the day-to-day operation. Be relentless at the same time you're doing that, looking for low-hanging fruit. And again, I don't mean to simplify it, but most companies that aren't performing well, and particularly if they're in a state of decline, if you have the luxury of coming from outside, which I did, wow, that's a huge luxury. It doesn't seem like it, but it's really helpful, because you see things that people that have been there a while just don't see. If you came into my house, you'd look at the corner and say, hey, Tony, you didn't paint over here. Or this is wrong over here.
But I promise I wouldn't say anything.
Yeah.
I might think it, but I wouldn't say anything.
Is it on camera, Kelly? Can you see it? But I think so. Let me admit that there was a benefit by coming from the outside. Yeah. If you don't have that, bring someone from outside, but also take a beginner's mind to your own business. Look at things that could be done better. And so what I found is there was a whole, not easy, but by low-hanging fruit, what I mean is obvious things to do. And I'll give you a real simple example. I did an analysis of the customer experience at Thomas coming into the company. And I went out into the market. And in my first 2 months, I met with 60 different customers, along with sales reps. And what I found, is a pattern emerged pretty quickly. And these were customers, not prospects, customers. And what most of them said is, hey, I have to talk to 4 different people just to get things done in your company. And I have to repeat the same thing 4 different times.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, gosh, I should be able to fix that. And when I actually came back to the office and kind of walked people through it, by then they are understanding the vision we're trying to do. That was an example of low-hanging fruit. And it actually led to us changing our billing system and going to a SaaS-based billing system that, by the way, was recommended by somebody in finance. It wasn't recommended by somebody in the customer sides of the business, if you will. So I guess, relentless on that vision, but also if you can, keep your ears open, because you're going to see, hey, is this starting to resonate? But also you're going to get input on it to make it better. And then look for quick wins. Look for wins or milestones along the way, because you know what? To your point, to the attendee's question there, look, we don't have the luxury of stopping the business to do all this transformative work. We have to keep the lights on. Yeah. The other thing I'd mention, Kelly, is look, in very difficult situations, you may have to be very pragmatic and realize that, there were some decisions made that the company can't support the infrastructure that it has, or other decisions. I don't mean to be naive or cavalier about that. That's a really, really important thing. And those are things that in a turnaround, you have to be really open, transparent, and appropriate about those things. Because if you do come to that decision, I've seen more companies kind of kick that can, metaphorically down the road. And now, what was a clear problem 2 years later is a crisis.
Yeah. Well, Tony, I can't thank you enough for not only sharing your story and your perspective with us, but really giving us the right frame of mind to kick off today and tomorrow at Mastermind Live. So thank you from the entire team at Art of Procurement. Thank you on behalf of our entire audience for spending some time with us today.
Kelly, again, my thanks to you and Phil, to the sponsors, and to all the attendees. I really enjoyed the experience, and good luck with the rest of the event.
Thank you. And if you do happen to be watching in, stay exactly where you are. The next session up that will be starting in just a couple of minutes, Phil Ideson will be hosting Globality's Graham Moore, as well as Nicholas Wright and Ben Weston from BP. And they're going to consider how agile sourcing is the answer to procurement's most difficult challenges today. So thank you so much. Great first session, Tony. And thank you to everybody that joined us. Hang in for a couple of minutes and we will have the next session for you.